TwinGate allows you to keep private resources and internet traffic protected without the hassle of setting up a VPN. You can automate network configuration and deployment with tools like Terraform and Pulumi to quickly and securely connect to Kubernetes clusters, VPCs, and other technical infrastructure. You could try TwinGate for free for up to 5 users or start a 14-day business trial. Visit twingate.com to get started.
Packet pushers.
Hello and welcome to the Network Automation Nerds podcast, where we explore the latest in network automation from a practitioner's perspective. I'm your host, Eric Chou, a network engineer who loves everything about network automation. Today, we have a very unique guest, Srivats, who carved out a very unique niche in the world of network automation behind the innovative tool of Ostinato. In this episode, we'll explore the story behind the tool and his unique perspective in his solopreneur journey. Welcome to the show, Srivats.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for inviting me to the show. Very happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about who you are, your background. I came to know about your journey a little bit through Heavy Networking episode 729. So we'll keep the link in the show notes. So perhaps maybe just give an overview. And for people who are interested in like the longer story, they could go listen to that part. But, just a 30-second overview of your background, your origin story.
I'm a software developer. I started my career in the telephony world with ISDN and SS7 and Citron. And I'm dating myself here horribly. But in 2003, I switched over to IP networking. And since then, I've worked primarily in the data plane. So I've not been on the operation side. I've been on the developer side and on the data plane, not the control plane. So I'm not very good with control plane protocols, but pushing bits and bytes as fast as you can while implementing all the features of L2, L3 forwarding or MPLS forwarding or ACLs or tunneling. That's what I've been doing for the past 25 years. And in 2022, that's about 2 years ago, I quit my full-time day job to work on Ostinato full-time. And we'll talk about Ostinato later in the show.
Yeah, for sure. I think I caught the tail end of ISDN because when I was studying for my IE, first studying for my IE was like a multi-year journey. But when I studied for my IE, I caught on the tail end of that topic of like B channel, D channel, and your 23 versus 2, all that during that tail end. And I had to study, even though I saw nothing in the field or during my day job, but I still had that. But also later on when I was doing like SIP trunking and when I was doing, convergence on the SPC controller, session border controller, that is when I saw the interesting segues into that. So interesting that you did that in the very beginning and then you switched to the IP networking. And for people who are, maybe they're just starting their journey on networking, can you explain the difference between the control plane and the data plane?
Sure. So what most network engineers see and work with is the control plane. You work with the CLI, you configure some routing protocols, you configure interfaces and so on. And all of that is on the control plane. The control plane talks to each other. The various devices of the control plane talk to each other, signal each other, exchange routing protocol information and other information, link-related information, for example. The data plane is just concerned with pushing packets.
Right.
So all the intelligence is in the control plane and the boiled down intelligence is pushed into the data plane to tell the data plane how to forward packets and where to forward packets. And all the data plane is concerned with, if you look at it, is one packet comes in, there is a set of rules that the packet needs to be processed with. Those rules are processed as fast as they can. And the output port is found and the packet is put on the output port.
Right. When you program a like BGP protocol, for example, or OSPF protocol, you actually change the route information and you're saying these are all the possible routes that I've learned from my neighbor or I calculated from my own. And then that's your routing information database. And then you push it out into like a fib.
Yeah, so the rib is in the control plane, the fib is in the data plane. So the fib is like the filtered version of all the optimization that the control plane has done and found the best route towards the destination. And that's one route gets installed into the fib.
Obviously, in the beginning, all you're concerned about when you're doing network engineering, quote unquote, network engineer or systems engineering is dealing with the control plane, right? I mean, that's enough for my puny little brain to learn. But when I get to maybe a hyperscaler or maybe when I was working for a vendor, that is when I discovered there's a whole other world out there. I have to be concerned with just getting one packet from input port into that output port. And then you want to do it as fast as possible, right?
Right. And especially when you have rates like 10 gig, 100 gigs.
Yeah.
And the packet has to go through a set of features also. I mean, there's a set of features on the input port, then there's the forwarding decision, then there's a set of features on the egress port. There are filtering decisions, there are QoS decisions. So all of that needs to be done for every packet. And that's why, I mean, one thing that I find that a lot of network engineers who work on the control plane don't realize is data plane engineers will always talk in terms of PPS, packets
Yep.
per second, rather than Mbps, because the packet size really doesn't matter to us. Is the cost is per packet for us, and so that's why we will always talk in millions of packets per second or something. And suddenly when someone talks about Mbps and Gbps, we'll have to think, okay, and we'll have our immediate question will be, okay, at what packet size?
Right. Like 64-bit is very different from 1500.
Right.
If people are interested in learning more about that, I highly recommend Ross White's courses on O'Reilly Learning or some of his books. He really puts in terms of tying the two together on, how do you go from just routing decisions into a way to put it into like a ring or buffer or whatnot, and then the process that it goes through. So after going through his course, we will know why enabling QoS is really like you just drop the throughput by like, I don't know, twofold, fourfold, something along the line of that. So that's a great resource. So you work on the data plane and that directly translate into the Ostinato project, right? So give us a little bit of background on that.
Right. So when you're working on the data plane, you're concerned about parsing packets. Whenever a packet comes in, you're parsing packets to make sure everything is right. You extract information from the various packet fields that you use either in your forwarding decision or in your filtering decision or your QoS decision. So back in 2007, I was working on this home router product at my company. And previous to that, I used to work on a DSLAM product. And because I was working on the data plane, we had traffic generator tools like Ixia and Smart Bits available to us. Anyway, we needed to do performance testing. We needed to see push packets as fast as we can. And so I was always familiar with those, and those were always accessible to me.
Right.
But when I moved to this other project and I was leading this project for a small home router, I suddenly didn't have access to those. And then I figured out that engineers are figuring out these weird mechanisms to send packets and then figure out whether it's being forwarded correctly and so on, of how to generate packets. And I thought, why can't there be a tool that just generates simple packets, right?
It's easy to you, but it's like magic to others.
Tell me about it. 15 years and I'm still doing it. I thought it would be easy. And so I came up with a proposal, talked to my manager, said I need about 6 to 8 weeks to get this first prototype done. He said, I like the idea, but I can't give you more than 4 weeks. I said, no, 6 weeks is minimum. And then we couldn't reach an understanding. So that didn't work at the work, but that idea sort of stuck in my mind. I said, okay, I'm going to work on this in my free time. And thank God my manager didn't agree to that, because I discovered it takes a lot more stuff. I needed to learn a lot more. I mean, I've worked in the data plane. I've never worked with GUIs. I never built GUIs. And suddenly I had to do all that. I had to learn version control. I had to learn a whole bunch of different things before I could actually build anything. And then I rewrote the thing a couple of times because my first version was not scalable to various features and performances and so on. So thank God for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, right? So had your manager at the time agree to it, you would have done it on company time, would have been their project, their own IP, and they could decide where to go with it. So for people who are not familiar with smart bits or the Ixia that you mentioned before, I know I wasn't aware of any kind of traffic generator until later on when I was a product engineer. Similar to you, for like a home-based router, Linksys, in fact, right? Like they already was acquired by Cisco at the time, so Cisco Linksys, and we had to go test when we promised people back then, it was like, I don't know, like 100 meg or something like that, right? So when we promise people 100 meg or when we submit it for certification, we got to have some sort of statistics and actual tests to show the certification body that it actually goes through those bandwidth. So those are the Ixias and smart bits of the world, but they're expensive, right? Like if you're working in the home router market, the margin is very, very small. Like the D-Links and the Linksys, they don't really make a lot of money per device. So, in order to do these certifications, it's kind of a must, but at the same time, it costs an arm and leg to me at the time. So you went ahead and created this project. And how was the project constructed initially? Was it open source or free?
Yeah, that was an important point that I missed saying. These Ixia and SmartBit ports are actually extremely expensive and continue to be to this day. Those 100 meg has now become 10 gig and 100 gig. But if you go and try and get Ixia or SmartBit line card with 4 ports or 8 ports or 12 ports or whatever, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg and more.
Right. And they're broken down by features.
Right. And that's why even big vendor companies,
Yeah.
they have very limited resources because it costs them a lot of money to spend. And at the time when I made this, I thought I'm just going to make it like a packet crafter, because from a data plane perspective, I was not looking at performance. I was looking more at functionality to make sure that, packets with bad packet fields get dropped, packets with invalid headers or strange looking packets. I should be able to craft and create those packets to verify that my data plane is correctly dropping errored packets, forwarding the correct packets. For example, let's say source MAC address 0 or IP address 0, if there's some special handling to be done. So I needed to have full control on what the packet content looks like and the size of the packet.
There's no IP version 5.
Right.
If something comes in on a version 5, then
Right. So you have to look at all of those fields.
right.
So my aim was to build, I would today call it a packet crafter, saying you can craft every bit and byte of the packet. You have full control over the packet contents and the size of the packet. And because my manager hadn't agreed, and I was doing this on the side. So there was also the question of whether the company can claim control over IP over this. And I wasn't sure of that. I hadn't asked for permission because I was not sure I'm going to get it. And especially, I'm now talking about 2007. I'm here based in India. And the people here, the companies here are not very familiar with side projects and so on. Well, even I wasn't. I would just started working on it. And that's when it struck me that I anyway was a big proponent of open source.
Yes.
And Wireshark, which was called Ethereal at that time, I've been using it for all my projects and everything. I said, why don't I make this open source? And this would be like Wireshark in reverse, right? Wireshark takes one packet, breaks it down and shows all the components of it. I'm saying, you tell me all the components, I'll build a packet for you and put it on the wire.
Right.
When I launched it in 2010 as an open source project, I called it Wireshark in reverse.
And I think that's very accurate. So how was that path like? So you started out, again, if people want to know more about, I don't want to repeat what you already told on, heavy networking. So if people want to know more detail on your path, they could go check out the show notes, listen to that episode. But how was that path from 2010 to now have changed?
So from a product perspective, as I said, right, what I put out then was what me and the team needed at that time, which was more of a functional testing tool and a way to control the packet content and the size and so on. And so what I built was what we call the packet crafter. I added various protocols to it. It was cross-platform from day one. It was Windows, Mac, Linux, and BSD would work on all of them. So once that part was done, the next part was to try and push more higher rates. So the packet crafter sort of became a traffic generator. As in, you could control rates, you could control burst sizes, you could control burst rates, and you could control sending multiple streams at the same time or one after the other.
Like an iMix.
Right. And for QoS testing, you could send multiple packets, voice, video, data with the different DSCP markings and send them all out in parallel. So those were the kind of features that I built from a product perspective. And I also experimented somewhere around 2014 with DPDK. DPDK was new at that time, and I didn't have access to DPD capable hardware. Thankfully, it worked on a VM with a VNIC. And so I experimented with a VNIC and I was able to get about 12x improvement. With DPDK, there was about 12x improvement, but I never productized it because I was still sold on the story of open source. And well, you can listen to Heavy Networking of how I've become cynical about open source. But at the time, I was hoping someone from the community will come and I will build the architecture and APIs and he can just go and build the DPDK stuff. I wanted to focus on the core architecture and the core product and let the community build stuff around it. If you have listened to the other show, you would know that that didn't happen like that. And so I continued working on it. Again, all of this was on the side. I had a day job, and networking day jobs are not like a 9 to 5 thing. So as and when I got time, I started building more features. Around 2016, it had been about 6 years. I started some monetization experiments just to cover my cost. Right. To see that all the time and money and server and equipment that I was putting in from my own account, can I at least cover some of my costs?
Right.
And finally, I also added API and Python API support for scripting and automation kind of cases. So that open source story didn't pan out. And just about a couple of months ago, I decided to take Ostinato closed source because I didn't get any contributions. Almost the entire code is written by me, and I didn't have any trouble changing the license because anyway, the IP was held by me only. So I decided, especially now that I'm trying to make a living of it, it is more important that it makes enough money for me and my family to live. And so I decided, because that's not working. And what really made the decision for me was I realized that my insistence on keeping Ostinato open source was actually hurting the Ostinato product itself. The product could not grow because I was insistent on keeping it open source, right? The product is not growing. So it was like a vicious circle and I needed to break that loop. So I decided that I'll make it proprietary and then try more experiments to see what works.
I think there's so many points to double click on, but let's start with ever since the day one of the project until you close source it or start trying to extract value or monetize it. There's no team of 10, right? Like there's not a big team doing the features. I mean, you mentioned so many features and you mentioned several pivot points where instead of just functionality, you start adding bandwidth testing and all that stuff, and you're the only guy who's doing it.
Right. So, I mean, it was essentially a nights and weekends project whenever I had time. And so I'll make one release in a year or one in 2 years. And that was sort of the speed that I could. I mean, when I would have enough features or enough development done, I would say, okay, time now to cut a new release. So there was
Right.
no planning, that, okay, next 6 months there is a release. These are the features I'm going to work on. I didn't have the luxury of doing any of that. I still don't. I still am a one person doing this and hoping I can make enough money so that I can hire someone at least to do some part of it.
Documentation or something like that.
While I was doing it open source, it was fine. Now to do it as a business, there are so many other hats that you have to wear that time for me to do development, actual coding and programming and make new features is now even less.
I think that's kind of interesting because, you and Ethan talked about the sustainability of open source. And what you have mentioned also just now is the fact that you were insisting on keeping it open source. So it wasn't bringing in monetization. You could not scale out yourself, right? You're just one person. It doesn't scale out. And therefore, it stopped the growth from Ostinato. For example, the release cadence, right? Like, so for Juniper, for example, they're very strict on the calendar on releasing 4 releases
Mhm.
per year, and each release will include several new features, bug fixes, and all of that stuff. So for people who are enjoying the product, I'm sure many of them are able to pay and are willing to pay for some say in the driving the direction of the project, the features to add, and so on, but they don't even have a way to do it.
Right. And I could not commit to doing that because I was doing this on the side in the limited time that I had, right? It was again a vicious circle, vicious loop where I just have this much time, I can do this much, and it'll come when it'll come.
Yeah. By the way, listeners, please finish this episode before you click on that. I know we kept on referring to the other episode, but finish listening to this one, please. But I'll summarize it for you. What was interesting to me was the various things you tried. It wasn't just like you woke up one day and go, I need to go make some money. Let's monetize this, let's commercialize this. No, you tried to place ads, you tried to have sponsorship, you tried all these various ways that did not work out. And I'll be honest with you, right? I wanted to sustain this podcast, for example, but it costs money to host, it costs money to schedule, it costs money, the software like Zoom, for example, right? Costs money, Calendly costs money. So I did try some of the stuff that you mentioned, like sponsorship, and people don't want to pay. People,
Something we learned the hard way.
exactly. People, if they have that for free, it's hard. It's like taking candy away. And when you take it away, they're like, why was it not cost money? So it wasn't very successful in doing that. It's interesting on the path that you've taken, and we'll kind of fast forward to it and say those ways did not work. And what you have finally settled on is you need to start charging for that software.
Right. And meanwhile, I've also made several insights. See, again, one problem with open source is it's not fully solved by being closed source, but sort of somewhere gets solved. It's better that you put out a software in the open, people download it, use it. If it works, you never come to know because they'll never call back. They'll tell you that this has worked. If it
Right.
doesn't work, that's when you hear about it.
Right.
And you don't even know what sort of use cases they are using it for. Is there something that is irritating them? Is there a new feature that can be done that will make the things even better? Unless they come and tell you, that doesn't happen, right? And with open source, that's sort of the general consensus that that's how it behaves. But once you put some money behind it, right, there is a value in the perception of the customer also, because the user has now become a customer. He has paid for a software, his expectations have increased, he's more ready to give feedback and ask for things.
Right. Or like entitled or something like that.
Right. So that way you come to know a little bit more about what they're using it for. For example, now I have people who reach out to me saying they want to build a solution using Ostinato. For example, there's an ISP that wants to deploy Ostinato on single board computers at various locations to do bandwidth testing.
Right.
So now people are coming to me and asking for these sort of solutions. Okay, and I forgot what question you asked.
No. I mean, I think you answered it perfectly. The evolution and, previously when it was during open source era, there was a bias toward you only receive the negative inputs because you only hear about it when it doesn't work. But now that you have a roadmap, because when people pay for software, they're a customer mindset where they feel more entitled for new features, or they're more driven, or they're more involved. It's more like a team rather than just somebody who's just consumed the software. Now that they're engaged and now you have a roadmap to go forward, dare I say more product market fit that you're going down that line.
Yeah, and they express their approval or disapproval with their wallet, right? So, for
Yep.
example, if I have a subscription, if I see that people are not renewing, I know somewhere I'm failing to meet their needs. So, I need to figure out what they are and how to address those. For example, one of my recent insights is just a traffic generator is not enough, in the sense that people don't want a traffic generator. People want a solution to their problem, their task at hand, the job to be done,
Yep.
which in case could be either a circuit bandwidth testing, or doing an RFC 2544 performance benchmarking,
Right.
or verifying QoS. Ostinato, as it exists today, is like a set of Lego blocks.
Right.
Here, take this, use it, and build it according to what your use case is, because it caters to a very wide variety of use cases. But people don't want that. People want pre-built solutions for specific tasks. I mean, while the generic thing is appreciated by some who may have some unique or corner cases, there's a large set of people who want a one particular test case. They don't care about the others. For example, benchmark testing RFC 2544 is a very common ask. So now I'm building specific thing on top of Ostinato to do just that.
TwinGate allows companies to keep private resources and internet traffic protected without the hassle of setting up a VPN. With TwinGate, you can automate network configuration and deployment with tools like Terraform and Pulumi to quickly and securely connect to Kubernetes clusters, VPCs, and other technical infrastructure. So say goodbye to open ports with direct, lightning fast, encrypted, peer-to-peer connections to easily enable secure access to your dev, test, staging, and prod environments with seamless integration to popular identity management tools. You could try TwinGate for free for up to 5 users or start the 14-day business trial. Visit twingate.com to get started. Once again, that's TWINGATE.com to get started.
That's a great point on finding out what's the need and, geared towards solution. They don't want a 5-inch drill. That's what people talk about, right? They want a 5-inch hole. So, finding out what they want and then overlay that with the current capability, your roadmap, and then coming out with the solution for them. I love that. I think that's a great insight. So maybe if I start charging for the podcast, then people would say, oh, I want to hear more about Ostinato. I want to hear more about data planes or the control plane or something like that. I like that analogy. So it sounds like moving it closed source was the right way to go, and it's working out. Obviously, you're still experimenting, but it looks like it's gearing toward the right direction. But that didn't come easy, right? On your mindset wise, it sounds to me you've always been an idealist. And it wasn't easy for you to make that switch. But you also mentioned about like fire movement, you're contemplating potential retirement or your definition of retirement. So I wanted to dive deeper into that process in the back end, because I think that's something that you did not mention on Heavy Networking because it was a technology based show. So I wanted to kind of get your thought on that. And just to give the listener a little bit of a context, at the time of the recording, we just got through probably the worst time in terms of layoffs in the tech industry. There was a time that on a weekly basis, there were weekly announcements of big techs being laid off, whether it's Microsoft, Meta, Google, companies that we thought were invincible, but now that they're laying people off. So I think that journey would help the listener a whole lot, even if it just helped a few people to think in terms of that. So what was that journey like?
Right. So the fire came much later. If I trace my journey back, I think it was back in 2005 when I first
Mhm.
started investing in mutual funds via something called the SIP route, Systematic Investment Plan. I don't know if that's something that's there in the US. So essentially, you commit to an X amount of money every month to invest in the mutual fund.
So it was like a dollar cost averaging. You committed the same like $1,000, and when the market is down, you buy more. Then the stock price is up, you buy a little less, but it averages out to be the same. So that's what kind of what you were talking about in 2005.
Right. So that's an effect. What the other side also, it helps build discipline in investing. You're not waiting or trying to time the market to see when is the market going down and I'll put this much amount of money, or it's going to go down further. Is it going to go higher? How much money should I put? It takes all that decision making away from you, which for a person like me is super helpful because
Right.
I'll get lost in analysis paralysis and will not be able to take a decision. So
Right.
for me, just turn that knob on, that X amount of money goes into this mutual fund every month, and then forget about it. I'll review it 1 year later.
Right.
So I started with some very small amounts of money because as a person, I'm a very risk averse person. And mutual funds was the first time that anyone in my family had ever invested in the markets. And till date, I don't do stock markets. I don't invest direct equity or direct stocks because I'm not interested in it. I can't take the time to understand it. Neither do I have the time to go analyze all of that. So I restrict myself to mutual funds. I'm happy. I'll pay someone else to do that job for me. The mutual fund manager can take that much commission and do that work for me. But
So no meme stocks, no GameStop.
yeah, no direct equity. It doesn't work for me. So anyway, coming back to my story, so 2005 was when I started. Again, very small amounts, try to increase it every year or two. What that helped me was build that discipline. In hindsight, that's what I can see. At that time, it was just an experiment. It was quite early in my career. I could afford to take some risk there, but in hindsight, I can see that it made me comfortable with investing in the market, which I was not earlier. So over the couple of years, as I invested, looked at my portfolio, looked at the growth in it, so I felt okay, I can do this. And somewhere I think around 2010 or 2011 is when I first heard about fire movement. And again, like those blogs that I was reading, the financial blogs, which are essentially US based blogs with like Get Rich Slowly, Mr. Money Mustache, people like that.
What does FIRE stand for? Sorry, I mean, didn't mean to interrupt, but for people who have not heard of that, FIRE, what does that stand for?
Yeah, FIRE stands for Financial Independence and Retire Early. So it's this movement where people are trying to get financially independent, where they don't have to work, but they might want to work.
Right. It's about the options and choices that you're able to do. So before I interrupted you, you were talking about you built that discipline, the investment muscle, if you will. And now that you discover this term and, like US based bloggers were talking about those.
Right. So again, so a lot of the concepts were applicable. As I said, I'm based in India. So the concepts were
Mhm.
applicable, but the actual tactics, the instruments, the rates, the numbers weren't really applicable to me. But still, it was very interesting concept. There are lots of stuff that I could still learn from that. A couple of years later, I discovered Indian bloggers who were talking about similar stuff. And that was really very useful to me because now it was in my context. They were talking about instruments and options available to me. They were talking about interest rates and inflation rates in India and whether fire is possible or not and what it takes and so on. No, it's very different in India because one thing that your audience must understand is in India, the rate of inflation is very, very high compared to the US. So, I mean, the published government rates are like 6 to 8% or something, but the real rates are much, much higher than that. So, anyone who's tracked their expenses would tell you it's anywhere between 15 to 30 to 40%. They're really high. So, any kind of fire thing is very, very difficult to do in India. And that's what the consensus was at that time. But compounding is a big thing. So again, it was something I thought it's nice. I could maybe aspire to it, but I didn't know whether I'll ever be able to achieve it. So what changed this thinking to me was somewhere, I think again about 2011, 2012, I first made an Excel sheet listing my net worth, all the holdings that I had and so on. And then every year I started updating it. I would add additional column for the next year and put down the latest numbers, see how much each had increased with. After I had done this for about 5 or 6 years, I realized that, okay, there is a good growth happening. Now, remember, I had started investing back from 2005. So I was in the market for a while and the compounding had sort of started kicking in then, and I was able to see some growth. That growth to see on an Excel sheet in concrete numbers told me this might be possible. So, the couple of things I tracked my expenses, I tracked my investment as a percentage of income. So, I did various things. I did that first to track how it is going. And then it became, oh, can I tweak this number? Can the expenses go lower? Can the investment go a percentage higher? It sort of becomes a game. But you have to be careful with that game because you could go overboard.
I don't know how your family likes that. Your wife is like, "What are you talking about?"
Right. So you could go overboard with that. So you have to be careful, and you could have cash flow issues. Your family may not be on the same page as you. So be careful with all of those. But have I reached the fire goal yet? No, I didn't. So what happened in between why I quit and while I was on this goal, while I was quit, was some other event that happened, which was essentially during COVID. I lost my friend and manager at work to COVID, and fire goals and this much corpus and saying goodbye to the day job was something that we often discussed at the lunch table, and we would take walks post our lunch and we would often talk about it. So when I lost him, that sort of triggered this very existential question as to what am I even doing here. I mean, I'm chasing this arbitrary number on an Excel sheet, and I'm not living my life. Am I doing what I want to do? Is this the life that I want? So a lot of questions came in, and I had to find answers to those. And so I decided that it still took me about a year after that happened, get the courage to say, okay, I'm also getting old. I'm 48 now. If I have to try this, it is now. I can't delay this much further. So the time is now. I still gave myself a lot of runway to experiment and try stuff. I haven't reached my fire goal, but the concepts of fire, the freedom, all that was like very motivating and inspirational thing to work towards and to imagine a life like that.
Yeah. I don't know if you read the book Your Money or Your Life, but it's almost like you're exactly the example they were talking about, right? Just to sum up that. And it's a classic. It's been around since the 70s. And now it's in its second edition, I believe. And I think the lady, one of the co-author passed away.
Wiki something.
Yeah. So she continued to update it so that it's a little bit more relevant. But the second edition still came out like 2017 or so. So it's still way back. But the gist of the story was she calculated your true earning or your per hour benefit or the money that you receive per hour after subtracting like energy loss or the money that you spend on buying nice clothes because you have to be in the office and so on and so forth. So your true costs of your life energy. So she equates that to your life energy per hour of work. And then you overlay that with, just say you're going down for an expensive dinner, that you overlay that, is this really worth 5 hours of my life or something like that? And then like she suggests what you did was to chart it out on this huge chart on your monthly expensive and your monthly revenue. And then, having that crossover point being where your passive income, or so to speak, or there's no true passive income, but like your income that you front loaded your effort of, like Ostinato, right? You spend most of your time building it, and then now you're getting a subscription and so on that crossing point being your point of your fire goal or whatnot. So I recommend people to read that and then kind of use your example and to overlay that in a kind of a real sense in the network engineering solopreneurship sense, that that would be a motivation for others. Something that you mentioned was it's very personalized, right? Your goal and something like that. You chatted with your manager at the time. Can you explain a little bit about what that meant for you?
Right. So it's called personal finance for a reason. The numbers, etc., are very personal to who you are, what kind of lifestyle you need, what your family situation is. For example, again, I'm going to be very upfront, tell you I'm a single person. It's easier for me to achieve a fire goal than a person with family and kids and so on. So all of those will be very different. Also, I'm a very frugal person. Not because
Yeah.
I don't like the good things, I don't feel the need for it. I would rather
Mhm.
spend my time with a book or listening to music than go out for dinner, for example.
Right.
So it depends on what sort of lifestyle you need and what things you would like in your life, what things are important to you and what things are not. So there's no fixed number, no fixed formula. You have to, and if you start reading about the FIRE movement, you'll learn about the 4% safe withdrawal rate and the 25x expenses and so on. All those are thumb rules. You have to find those numbers for yourself.
Also, another person who have been doing this for a while, advocating it, Remy Sethi, who does I'll Teach You How to Be Rich, and he also has a Netflix series. What he talked about was define your rich life, right? So for you, Srivats, the rich life might just be having that freedom, having that peace of mind, and you still enjoy reading, still enjoy the music, but not so much on maybe traveling to exotic places. But for other people, it might be a little bit different, right? They're willing to live in the hostels and travel cheaply. However, they get the enjoyment of the travel, and that's their rich life. So define your rich life and then figuring out how to get there without breaking bank or without so much of your life energy wasted.
Right. That's very true. I mean, for me, that rich life is I have an inner rich life. That's how I put it. For me, an expensive car is not very attractive as having an acoustic piano at home. So you have to find your own, as you rightly define what is your rich life.
Right. So being a solopreneur, that's a term that I coined for people who are maybe just not necessarily one person. I mean, there's in your case, it's just one person, but for a solopreneur who's, entrepreneur, but also doing it on a budget and perhaps just maybe some contractors and then working on it. So how is it like so far after you discover it? And on the technical side, we already talked about, getting more feedback loop. But on the personal side, was there any psychological change or what have you learned that surprised you?
Several things. For example, getting that fixed salary every month, to switch from that to get a varied income revenue every month is a difficult transition. And I've still not adjusted to it completely. And as they say, an IT job and a salary is sometimes like a golden handcuff. It can really prevent you because anything else is risky and you need to be careful if you take that step. So the varied income and how to plan for, I mean, your expenses are still X amount every month, but your revenue that is coming in is not the same every month. So how to buffer that, how to create a corpus so that you can take out from that and you're not affected by the cash flow that is very varied every month. That needs sometimes adjusting to and putting in place systems to take care of that. The other thing is self discipline. With a job, you have a boss who's telling you what to do, prioritizing things for you, and setting up deadlines for you. As a solopreneur, you have to do all that for yourself. And while that flexibility is quite nice, you can start work late, end late, you can take a break in between, but somewhere you also have to figure out systems for yourself. Otherwise, these things go haywire. And so that is the second learning that I've had, that I have to create schedules and systems in place, and I have to set up time that, okay, I'm going to still work Monday to Friday. I'm not going to take Saturday, Sunday off, even if I'm in the middle of something that I could actually continue working and I'm in the zone and I want to continue. But if I don't take breaks, that has negative effects in the longer run. So I'm going to still force myself to take a break. So you have to find these systems and find out what works for you and establish those ground rules.
Yeah, those are great points on, first of all, finding consistent work and then kind of, not having a lifestyle creep when you're getting more because down the line there might be a slow month where you have to buffer that in and finding a system that works for you, setting boundaries because now you're your own boss, right? Like you look in the mirror to find your boss and therefore you need to give yourself a break or kind of push yourself wearing different hats. So for people who want to follow your path on being a solopreneur or going down the path of getting that fire goal, what kind of recommendation would you give them knowing what you know now?
Specifically for the financial independence part of it, I would recommend three things. Track your net worth, do it consistently, do it at least yearly, but you can do it even quarterly. It's a cadence that you would like to set for yourself, but not more than an year. So do it, create columns for every year, put down everything, see how things are growing. It'll tell you where you are, and after a couple of years, that increase will give you motivation to work towards it, and it'll make you feel that this is possible. Second, the metric that I would ask people to track is investment as a percentage of income. For me, that has helped. Again, all of these are recommendations based on my experience, may not be true for you, but I can only tell you what I have been through. And some people can also benefit from expense tracking. It gets very messy. I mean, don't go down to the very details. I now do it only at an yearly interval. All my expenses are from a single bank account. So at the end of the year, I just print out a whole statement, see which are not applicable entries, and then just do a rough estimate. If you are on the fire goal, you have to constantly track, because don't assume that if you run your number once, those numbers and your assumptions are valid after a couple of years. You at least every year review those numbers and your assumptions, whether they are still valid or not. Even if you reach the fire
Right.
goal, you still should be doing that,
Right.
because the world is too dynamic, things change too much.
Yeah, so those are the interesting recommendations that you would give people on just knowing what's possible. I always say putting a finger on the pulse of where your financial muscles are, basically being your own P&L entity, right? Your profit and losses, your cash flows, a company of one, if you will. So, as a company, you track it and you're working in a corporation, you're so far away removed from that kind of stuff. You always think of it as a finance person's job. But now, if you're your own company and you treat it like one, then you have to know where you get your money from, where you're spending your money, and where's the delta. So I think those are very good advices. Even if you're not on this fire path or solopreneur, still just good to do at the personal level.
Yeah, and it doesn't take much. I mean, if this sounds like too much of a task or a chore to do, it's really not. You can take a couple of days at the end of the year and during your Christmas vacations just to put everything in order. Just take out all your bank statements, and now everything is online. So it's not too difficult to get a summary of it at the end of the year. So it's easily done and it doesn't take too much time. And don't think of it as a chore. Just also educate yourself about it. Read books, blogs, watch videos, and surround yourself with people who are also on the same path or thinking about those same things. I mean, and that's also not very difficult to do because people after your same age, colleagues, everything, they also are on the same path. They're also thinking of those same things. And sometimes money is something that we do not discuss with each other, but it is good if you surround yourself with other people who talk about these things. It will automatically happen. You don't have to think about it. It's just general conversation that happens on the lunch table.
I agree. I think sometimes the money subject is a taboo that people don't really talk about. We don't talk about each other's salary, for example, or we don't talk about, your financial goals. And that directly translates into anxiety. I mean, because people don't talk about it, naturally, if you look at online or like Instagram or Twitter or whatever, then you think everybody else is doing so well. And now you're saying, okay, am I the only one who worries about, I know you're single, but for me, worries about my daughter's tuition and this rising, university cost year over year. So I know this episode may not be what people would expect, but after listening to what you talked about on Ethan's episode, that is why I wanted to reach out. I think this is an important topic for people to know and to get a different perspective. And I myself have, encountered the fire movement and follow everything you talked about, right? Like, tracking my expenses, looking at my net worth. And I've been doing that since around 2015. And, so almost 10 years. And I would, Roger, and second your opinion that it may feel like tedious in the beginning, but it's like working out. You get that financial muscle. The more you do it, the movement becomes more natural to you. So I know this topic may expose some vulnerability. So I really appreciate you being here and sharing all of your thoughts. So, I mean, we're coming up on time, and I do want to say thank you again for, sharing your thoughts. Is there anything that, you feel important that we have not discussed?
On the same solopreneur and fire journey, I would just have one parting thought. You're not alone on this journey. So talk to people around you. You'll get a lot of support.
I think that's very valuable. Just even as an engineer, right? Like your personal finance aside, this could help your career in identifying what your value is in the company or discussing with your manager on what you're doing technically. Like, for example, upgrading from a 10 gig to 100 gig, that's a technical bit, but you can help the business grow, or that bandwidth is going to help the service on the back end to be more efficient, or like actually directly translate into business language that will help you push your costs forward. So I think this is both a personal thing as well as a career growth thing.
Yeah, I agree.
So besides that, I know, you talk about you're not alone, talk to people. Is there any other call to action? I mean, I'll give you one if you don't have one. Just go try Ostinato. It's a great tool.
Yeah, that gives me an idea now that your audience is here. So as I've told you, I am a network developer. I'm not worked on the operation side, and the network automation that I know about is more from a vendor testing point of view, where we develop new features and we write automated scripts to do regression testing and make sure we're not breaking anything and the feature works as well. But because you have a network automation audience here, I would like to know from your audience how a traffic generator like Ostinato can work for you. Is there something that you go try Ostinato? There is an online demo available on the website, and we'll put the links in the show note to that. And try it out if you think it can help you in your automation journey, but it needs this extra feature or you're not sure how to do. Reach out to me. I'm available both on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and we can have a conversation about it. I'm happy to help and happy to understand what people are doing.
Speaking like a true solopreneur. Now you have to do marketing. Now you have to advertise. Joking aside, I think that's great because, as you mentioned, right, people haven't thought about it, but now that there's a cost efficient tool out there, then the ISP out there that could, have a single board, I don't know, Raspberry Pi that put on the rest of the world that you could detect peering downs, or, your bandwidth is degraded or anything like that, automatically reports back to help your automation journey I mean, one thing I could think of was, your CI/CD pipeline, right? Like once you did the upgrade, you want to make sure you're just putting that new fiber link. So you want to automatically test that there's no packet drop, the fibers are clean, and so on and so forth. And you want to do it automatically into various locations so that you could detect your fault points. Yeah. So again, thank you, Srivats. It's a pleasure to have you here. I know this is kind of an unconventional content episode, but I think this is a very valuable one. And I hope the listeners, learn from your experience. And I wish the best of luck in Ostinato, your own path. And let's keep in touch. I mean, maybe we'll have a follow-up in 5 years and you're like, I reached that goal and I'm now sipping, Mai Tai in Hawaii.
Sure, we should do that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Network Automation Nerds. Do you have any feedbacks for Network Automation, our guest Srivats, or this episode? Send us some follow-ups on packetpushers.net/FU, where the FU stands for follow-up, of course. And we really do want to hear back from you. Check out our website at packetpushers.net to find other network engineering focused podcasts, blogs, YouTube videos. We have weekly updates for Network Break, deep dive into technology with heavy networking, and so much more. Last but not least, remember that too much network automation will never be enough.